Leo Tolstoy, the titan of Russian literature, is renowned for masterpieces like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, novels that span generations and capture the human soul with rare depth. His words paint epic battles, tragic loves, and moral dilemmas, cementing his place as one of the greatest writers in history. Yet behind the pen that captivated the world was a restless man, a tormented philosopher who, even at the height of his success, felt the ground collapse beneath him. Tolstoy wasn't content to simply narrate life, he needed to understand it. And it was this relentless search for the meaning of existence that led him on a journey as gripping as his own stories. Born in 1828 into an aristocratic family, Tolstoy grew up surrounded by privilege. As a young man, he indulged in the pleasures typical of his class: hunting, balls, trips across Europe, and even excesses he would later recount with regret in his diaries. He was a man of contradictions, a noble who served as a soldier in the Crimean War, a celebrated writer who, deep down, felt the weight of a seemingly perfect life. Around the age of 50, when many would settle into their glory, Tolstoy was swallowed by a crisis that made him question everything. Literary success, wealth, fame, none of it was enough. He wrote in confession, his raw account of this period: "My life came to a standstill. I could breathe, eat, sleep, but there was no life, because there was no meaning I could find." What triggered this breakdown? Death, that unavoidable shadow, became his obsession. Tolstoy stared at the end of existence and wondered, if everything ends in nothingness, why live? He wandered through the labyrinth of his mind, where questions like, what's the point of all this effort? And why does happiness slip away even when we achieve our dreams? Echoed without answers. This wasn't just fleeting melancholy, it was a cry from the soul, a desperate search for something to transcend the void. And that's where his universality lies. Who hasn't felt, even for a moment, that same emptiness? How many of us, caught up in routines, achievements, or distractions, haven't noticed that something essential is missing? Tolstoy could have surrendered to despair. Many would have, but he chose a different path. Raised in a deeply religious Russia, he had initially rejected Orthodox faith, criticizing its rigidity and hypocrisy. Now, though, he returned to it with fresh eyes, not as dogma, but as a possibility. He read the Gospels, studied Christ's teachings, and sought in the simple words of the Sermon on the Mount something to explain life. At the same time, his restless mind ventured beyond Christian borders. He explored Buddhism, Islam, Taoism, diving into Eastern and Western philosophies. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a fight for his soul's survival. This aristocrat, once obsessed with status, began to shed his possessions. He started wearing peasant clothes, working the land with his own hands, rejecting extravagance. His contemporaries saw him as eccentric, maybe even mad. But Tolstoy wasn't after approval, he was after truth. And it was in this transformation that he began to glimpse answers. For him, life wasn't in fleeting glories, but in something deeper, something that connected a person to themselves, to others, and to the universe. What did Tolstoy discover in this spiritual plunge? How did he reconcile death, faith, and the meaning of existence? His journey didn't end in crisis, it blossomed into ideas that challenged his era and continue to provoke us today. Next, we'll explore the conclusions of this tireless thinker, a man who, by unraveling the meaning of life, invites us to do the same. After the abyss of his existential crisis, Leo Tolstoy emerged transformed. The aristocrat who once reveled in luxury and applause gave way to a man in a simple tunic, hands calloused from the hoe, and a soul ablaze with a mission to uncover the meaning of life. He cast off the materialism that had defined his youth, rejecting the opulence of Russian nobility as an empty illusion. For Tolstoy, true existence wasn't found in ballrooms or medals, but in simplicity, morality, and a connection to something greater than the self. This metamorphosis wasn't just personal, it became a philosophy he lived and preached until his final days. At the heart of this transformation was his reinterpretation of Christianity. Tolstoy turned to the Gospels, but not to the grandiose rituals of the Russian Orthodox Church, which he saw as an institution corrupted by power. He found a moral compass in Jesus' teachings, especially the Sermon on the Mount: love for others, forgiveness, humility, and above all, nonviolence. To him, Christianity wasn't about dogma or promises of heavenly salvation, but about living ethically in the here and now. Do not resist evil with evil, but with good became his mantra, a radical idea that rippled far beyond the Russian steppes. Decades later, Mahatma Gandhi, inspired by Tolstoy's letters and his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, would adopt this peaceful resistance as a weapon against colonial oppression, proving that the ideas of a rural writer could shake empires. The essay A Confession, written in 1879, offers the clearest window into this journey. In it, Tolstoy bares his soul, recounting how literary success and wealth failed to quiet his anguish over death and life's absurdity. He describes his search for answers in science and philosophy, only to find them lacking the intellect, no matter how brilliant, couldn't explain the why of existence. It was in observing the peasant's simple people who lived with faith and dignity, despite hardship, that he found a clue. For Tolstoy, the meaning of life wasn't in achievements or reason, but in surrendering to moral principles and an intuitive, uncalculated faith. Life is a mystery that can only be lived, not solved, he concluded, embracing a practical spirituality rooted in everyday existence. This outlook put him at odds with the Orthodox Church. By rejecting sacraments, the absolute divinity of Jesus and clerical authority, Tolstoy challenged the religious establishment. He accused the Church of betraying Christ's teachings for political power, a critique so fierce that, in 1901, he was excommunicated. Far from being shaken, he saw it as liberation. His followers, known as Tolstoyans, began forming communities based on his ideals of equality and manual labor, while his philosophical works, like What I Believe, spread his ideas worldwide. Tolstoy didn't offer easy answers. He insisted that each person must seek their own truth, but he pointed to a path: live authentically, reject violence, and love without expecting reward. His philosophy, born from despair, blossomed into hope, influencing not just Gandhi but generations of thinkers and activists. How do his ideas resonate today, in a world once again caught between materialism and uncertainty? In the next section, we'll explore the legacy of this man who, by unraveling the meaning of life for himself, left a map for us to follow in our own search. Leo Tolstoy died in 1910, but his ideas have crossed time like a beacon for those seeking meaning amid chaos. His impact is vast. He influenced Gandhi in the fight for India's independence, inspired Martin Luther King Jr.B. in his nonviolent resistance against segregation, and resonated with writers like Virginia Woolf, who saw in his psychological depth a mirror of the human soul. His philosophical works, such as The Kingdom of God is Within You, shaped pacifist and anarchist movements, while his focus on simplicity planted seeds for trends like modern minimalism. Tolstoy wasn't just a writer or thinker, he was a force that challenged systems and reignited essential questions about how we live. Today, his reflections strike with renewed power. In a world saturated with consumerism, technology, and hustle, many face the same emptiness that once tormented him. An existential crisis masked as comfort. The pursuit of happiness through material goods or external validation often ends in disillusionment, an echo of what Tolstoy realized over a century ago. His answer, a life guided by truth, morality, and human connection, offers a counterpoint to contemporary debates about purpose and spirituality. While some seek meaning in mindfulness or self-help, Tolstoy reminds us that the essence lies in action, loving others, rejecting violence, and living authentically. His questions, why do I live, and what remains after death, are as universal as they are timeless, urging us to look beyond the superficial. His relationship with death, which once paralyzed him, evolved into a serene acceptance. By finding purpose in faith and kindness, he stopped fearing the end. Death is merely a passage, he wrote, viewing it as part of a larger cycle, subordinate to a meaning that transcends the individual. This perspective culminated in his final days, a chapter as dramatic as his novels. At 82, weary of the contradictions between his ideals and family life, Tolstoy fled home in secret, renouncing wealth and status. Accompanied by a disciple, he sought an even more austere existence, but fell ill on the way. On November 7, 1910, he died at the Astapovo train station, surrounded by strangers and journalists, yet free from the chains he'd rejected. His death in a place of transit symbolized his life, an unrelenting quest for freedom and truth right to his last breath. Tolstoy's legacy isn't a ready-made answer, but an invitation. He provokes us to ask, what gives our existence meaning? Is it success, pleasure, or something deeper, like compassion and integrity? In a world racing against time, his ideas remind us that life doesn't have to be an unsolvable mystery. It can be a path walked with courage and an open heart. Tolstoy, the writer who unraveled the meaning of life for himself, leaves us a map, not to follow blindly, but to inspire us to chart our own. May his journey, marked by crises and redemptions, push us to question, to seek, and perhaps to find